see this headline, which is call for Miliband to go as second oil refinery loses jobs. Now, this is referring to the Lindsey Oil Refinery near Grimsby, where 125 workers have been told that they're going to lose their jobs. Let's talk to Dave Smith. He works there and he's also representative of the Unite Union. Thank you for joining us today. What have the workforce been told there, Dave?
So 125 of the workforce have been told as of Tuesday morning that they have notice of redundancy and they are leaving on the 31st of October. The rest of the staff on site have been told that they are guaranteed until the end of January next year.
Now, the boss of the Unite Union has suggested that the Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband, should be sacked. I mean, who do you blame for what's happening to that refinery?
Obviously, it was mismanaged by the previous owners, and I don't really want to get into that because this is all about the jobs and the workforce. But I do echo Sharon Graham's claims of he should be sacked, as should Michael Shanks. They should be doing more to safeguard the refinery. We don't have the energy security in this country that they claim we do. We rely on huge imports, and as you've all been saying, it's about the environment, and we refine cleaner and greener than anywhere else in the world. So we have the ability to do carbon capture eventually. We have enough space to have captured all the CO2 from the start of the British Industrial Revolution and then have space. So if we refine it greener and we can do the carbon capture, we should be protecting British jobs.
And what is it that you want the government to do? You spoke about Ed Miliband there and the other minister. What is it that you think they should be doing?
They should be stepping in right now and saving this refinery. We are being told that it will not continue as a processing, operating refinery. It will be sold, it will be scrapped, and we're going to lose all that production in this country. I mean, we have a direct line down to Heathrow. We can fuel 120 Airbus A320s every single day. We produce 500,000 litres of UK-grade diesel per hour. So we are roughly 20 to 25% of the inland diesel market in this country, and we're just going to throw it away and rely on imports from countries like Turkey and India, and they refine Russian crude oil. OK,
Dave, stay with us. Zach, I just want to bring you in there. I mean, Dave is making the point that they are refining in a clean way, and actually it's just going to happen somewhere else where it's not being done in that way. What's your response to that?
Well, I'd start by saying this is awful for anyone to lose their jobs, and my thoughts are with those people and their families. I think it's also indicative of successive governments who have not created a plan for a just transition. And all I mean by that is making sure we're protecting workers' jobs, that workers are at the table from the very beginning. So in co-production and co-design, we look at how do we create new industries. I think there's a wider question too, which points to what Sonia was saying. It's about what the government subsidises and what we make political choices about. Right now, they're subsidising kerosene, that's jet fuel for aviation, but they're hardly subsidising at the same rate train travel. That's completely the wrong way round. And again, it's the same with the oil refinery. I'm not convinced at all by carbon capture technology. It doesn't exist at the scale that we need it to. And we know that the climate crisis is accelerating. So I think we do need an honest conversation about that and look at what are the alternative industries, like the insulation industry, like retrofitting, like renewable energy, and lots of other industries that will come along the way, where they're not magic technologies that don't exist yet at scale, but actually we go, what are the practical differences we can make to create manufacturing in this country and create the just transition that has workers at the heart of it.
But are you talking about workers there, like Dave, being, retrained to do something completely different? Is that what you're suggesting, if you were the minister now in charge of this?
That's exactly what I'm suggesting, but I'm also saying in the same breath that this work should have happened decades ago. So it shouldn't be when something's about to close. I was at Port Talbot when the steelworks closed just a few weeks before. It was very obvious what was going to happen then, and the Labour government still didn't have a plan, or Conservative government at that point. No government had a plan because they weren't in active engagement with the trade unions in a meaningful way. Very often it's about electoral cycle to electoral cycle, as opposed to taking a long-term view and saying we have a climate crisis, we have a nature crisis, we do have to change the way we get around, the way we heat our homes, the way we have the whole energy system. But we also need to make sure that we protect workers. You know, there's no jobs on the dead planet. So all of these things are combined. They shouldn't be put in opposition to each other, but they require planning and workers, again, to be at the heart of the co-production.
Dave, what's your reaction to that?
I think, everyone will understand that there should be a just transition, but this is completely off a cliff edge. And it's the workers that are losing out here. They are all of a sudden going to be losing their jobs, wondering how they're going to pay their mortgage. So I think everyone agrees that we should be transitioning to a greener society, but we need to be given the time to do that. And we have the capability to do that. We have the North Sea, They say there's roughly 10% left in there. Well, let's use that 10% and refine in this country and give us the time to have a just transition rather than off a cliff edge.
Use the 10% of oil?
So most of the oil has already been taken out of the North Sea, and there just isn't a lot there anymore. But actually, it's also deeply dangerous for the climate crisis. And yes, we absolutely need to protect workers' jobs, but we also need to protect the planet too. Most of that oil and gas is sold on the international markets. It doesn't actually benefit our bills. And I think it's ultimately about looking, how do we make sure we have these new renewable energies? I really hear you, Dave. What I'm saying to you right now is no help to the workers who have just lost those jobs and those who are facing redundancies. And I totally accept that, which is why I'm saying we need to have this broader conversation. But at the same time, in this broader conversation, it is not truthful for a politician to say, this is just going to be okay if we just frack, if we just take more oil and gas. We do need to change the way that we heat our homes, the way we get around. And to do that is a difficult and complex conversation. But what I'm saying is, let's have that conversation and let's make sure you and your union workers are in that conversation, as opposed to what's happened previously, which is top down, where people are just worried about big business, the multimillionaires and billionaires who are making profits no matter what happens, while workers are being screwed over.
Let's bring Dave back in there. Dave, what's your reaction to that?
I think we need to look at the reality of this, that if Lindsey Oil Refinery does close, then the need for diesel, the need for jet fuel and petrol remains. It doesn't just go away because we've lost the refinery. So when we're already importing nearly 3/4 of the diesel that we need and nearly 90% of the jet fuel we need into this country, it just seems absolute lunacy that we are shutting a refinery and losing that capability. And let's be honest, I spoke to Ed Miliband on Tuesday and he didn't disagree with me that we are basically in a Cold War situation right now with Russia. We've just increased spending on defence from 2% to 5%. How are we going to fuel that exactly? And obviously, he couldn't give me an answer.
Well, the answer at Miliband
I just want to bring in, I just want to bring in Penny here on all of this. I mean, in terms of government interventions and industrial policy, do you think the government should be doing more in some of these cases?
Well, I think that, I mean, with this particular case, I hope the government are trying to facilitate us retaining this facility. I mean, I think it should be in the private sector, but it is something that is very important to our national resilience. That is very clear. But actually, what the government should be doing is looking at its policies. This is a direct result of a particular approach to the environment. As Zach said, if we just use fossil fuels and we just use oil, that's not going to be good for the environment. No politician is saying that. We've had a huge transformation in renewable energy. There's huge investment going into nuclear energy now, thank goodness. But if you just close off this important route for us to have energy resilience, for us to retain very important sovereign capabilities to this country, all you are doing is piling on costs, ultimately to bill payers, and helping other nations that perhaps we don't want to help. It is wrong. And I hope that this might be another wake-up call for the government.
Sonia?
I think it's important to be clear that the closure of this refinery is not a direct result of government policy. There was very, very clear mismanagement by the former owners, and that's why it's gone into receivership. So I think there are questions here. I agree that actually with the union, this is a question of national security, of energy security. And so it raises questions about ownership of strategic national assets. Why was this allowed to happen? And then what do you do when something that is key to national security does run into issues like this? I think there are definitely questions for government ministers and how they've handled this compared to, for example, some of the steel plants that were at risk of closing. So there are questions there. I think when it comes to people losing their jobs in these circumstances, one thing I would say is that, we saw the impact of deindustrialisation in the late 1970s and the 1980s. So many people lost jobs and then ended up never working again. And that triggered intergenerational cycles of poverty in some of those places. Some of those places have still not recovered. And we have absolutely not learned the lessons from the late 1970s and 1980s about how you equip people whose jobs, in this case, I think it was because of mismanagement, but where industries may be naturally closing, we have not learned the lessons of how you retrain people and how you support those people. And you basically can end up consigning those people to the scrap heap, and that is completely unacceptable.
But where government policy does affect this situation is that you're going to find it very hard to get the private sector to invest in something that you are saying has no future in the short term.
That's why I think the public sector need to step in here and have a whole vision of what new jobs look like, new renewable energies, wind turbines, solar panels, all of that manufacturing. There's loads of jobs there waiting to happen. We just need to make sure there's a smooth transition, because Sonia's exactly right. We need to make sure we're protecting people's livelihoods over the long term.
And Dave, just final word to you. What comes next? Have workers there been given any hope at all, or any chance of retraining, anything like that?
What next is that we carry on fighting for the ownership of Lindsey Oil Refinery. We know there are at least 2 full-site bids on the table as a going concern to keep it running as a refinery. It just feels as though the official receiver and the liquidation company are not listening, and they would sooner sell it as a part site and not as a running refinery. So we are working really, really hard behind the scenes to have these bids listened to, have them checked, make sure that they are credible, and fight for our jobs and hopefully get those 125 redundancies overturned.
OK, Dave Smith, thank you very much for joining us today on all of that. Now, we're going to talk about